Complexity exposes how organizations actually operate. When growth and pressure increase, the challenge is no longer strategy, but it is how do you sustain performance? How do you hold accountability? And how do you manage leadership consistency across the organization? This is Terry Wilson with Operating Discipline, CEO and Senior Leader Conversations about organizational performance under pressure. Today, we're speaking with Kelley Brine, who is the president of Rose Valley Management, and I'm really excited to hear our conversation. Welcome, Kelley.
Thank you for having me, Terry.
Can you tell us a little bit about Rose Valley Management and about you?
Sure. I'm the president here at Rose Valley Management. We oversee approximately 10,000 units across the country, with roughly about $2 billion in assets under management. I came into this role during a period of significant growth for our company, where my focus has been mostly on building the operational discipline needed to scale our business successfully. We manage everything from Class A to Class C, urban communities, workforce housing, lender takeovers, and third-party management. We are vertically integrated, and every property is different, but we hope and strive for that leadership principles across all of them are remarkably consistent and the same.
You know, it's interesting. You mentioned that my favorite words right up front, operating discipline. I'm like, that is great. So today we want to focus on our conversation for the pre-call was really about people first. So what does that look like at Rose Valley Management? What does that mean and how do you do it?
Yeah, I think it's just really important for all of the employees across the board to feel seen and heard. And those are actually two very different things. I think it's through your operations, through your standard operating procedures, through all of your day-to-day interactions that it can trickle down to the on-site level, but also you feel it the same at the corporate level. And I think there's several different ways to do that, whether it's through meetings, whether it's through company summits, but also whether it's through, your regular operating procedures, making sure that they have a say in the way that the culture of each building is that transcends into the culture of the company.
It's really easy to say that because most companies will say that. I find it in my years of experience, it happens differently in different companies. And so how does that happen at Rose Valley Management? How many people report to you?
Direct reports, I have about 7.
Okay. And so we know when you have direct reports, you can have a philosophy and your leadership team can have a similar philosophy, but by the time it gets to the frontline employee, it feels very different. So what are you doing to make sure that what you're talking about, that people first, flows through the organization?
Well, I think there's several different ways to get buy-in and to have people all kind of fall into the same mindset. One thing that's really important is to have accountability and ownership, and to make sure both of yourself and for other people. They can be really even simple things. When you're writing an email to a group, making sure you're naming who you're asking instead of just throwing it out to the group, making sure that you have clear designated deadlines and expectations so that when people don't report by a certain time, you've already set out the expectations of what you think success looks like, and you're not setting them up for failure. And then also reminders. I tell people all the time, don't wait until somebody fails to tell them, oh, you didn't do this. Send a reminder or put it in their calendar or do things to just help each other out. I think a lot of times it's through the simple actions, not the really over complex leadership styles that actually help transcend, I think, throughout the company. Another thing that can be difficult, I think, with any growing company is how do you have a company grow and get everyone to buy into the mindset of growth without ever fearing that somebody else is going to take your job or have, a culture of, either jealousy or fear or always kind of looking over your shoulder. I think that doesn't create the best output for employees. You want employees to feel secure in their job and feel like there's growth opportunities for them, but also help to grow people below them. And I think we do that through succession planning. And that's something that's really important in our company, to always be growing the people beneath you, because it's easier to say to a property manager or a regional or even a VP, I can't promote you to the next job if I don't know who's going to be taking your job underneath you. But if you make it easy for me, you're excellent. The person underneath you is excellent. The person underneath them is excellent. That makes that whole push from the bottom much easier. And I think that's how you really get a sustainable growth within a culture and a company.
I totally agree. I mean, my life's work is in this space. And so one of the questions I always like to ask is, when we talk about growing people, does the organization have enough movement within the organization so people can easily move? Because you can prepare people to move, but then people stay in place in spaces, right? Right.
Mhm.
I'm locked in, and there's no place for people to move to, and then they start to move out. So how does
Right.
role management do that?
So I think there's several different ways. One of which is all moves are not, vertical. Sometimes they're lateral, and sometimes that's still an opportunity. And it's not just about talking to an individual about growth, it's about talking to that individual supervisor. One of the things I talk about with my team, my direct reports, and then also um, our regionals is who is your next person? Who do you think? Because you see them every day. Who is your next person that you think could be a regional? Who do you think is up for a promotion? Who do you think is good at this niche job that we are looking to fill? Do you have anybody? We would always rather look within our company than look outside of a company. And one thing that I've learned after 27 years in property management is I think it's easiest to have people learn one of the two things they need to do with a new job at a time. So if someone is growing from being per se a senior property manager or property manager to a regional, that's an easier growth path if it's within the same company. Um, because you're not learning the company. But if you're bringing on a new regional from outside the company, they already know the job. They're familiar with what it takes to bring in an experienced regional, then they have to learn the company. But to bring in an inexperienced regional to learn the company and the job, I think is kind of setting them up for failure. So give them one growth path instead of two at the same time.
I like that. I like how you split that up because it really is true. And I don't think enough companies consider that. I think if they hire someone who has experience, they have an expectation that they'll hit the ground and start running. And there's always an orientation that has to happen. You know,
Yeah, I have to say, Terry, it's not that I'm like, oh, I'm so smart. I thought of this. You learn so much from your failures, from having done things. But one of the most important parts of not succeeding at something or making mistakes is turning around and assessing and saying, what did I do wrong here? What can I learn from this? How did I maybe not set this up to be in the best position it could have been? And it was from hiring a senior manager for a regional position that it was too much to take on at once, and really kind of understanding where I went wrong as a leader and what I could do to improve.
you know what, Kelly, thank you for saying that because I think, there's several points that you've made over this conversation already that I want to go back to. But that's one, which is, again, when you hire a person that is not as successful in their role as you wanted them to be, do you feel that many times the look is at the person and not necessarily at the person? Got that. But also, how did we set them up for success?
I think often the easiest thing to do is say, oh, that person just didn't work out.
Mhm.
But a lot of times that's not the case, right? It can be disorganization within that position. It could be onboarding to start. You know, it's all sequential and it's all circumstantial, and what circumstances had led to that. But everybody involved in that hiring process, from the president to HR, everyone has to be able to turn around and say, okay, what could we do differently next time? We don't have to kind of pick through, you did this wrong, you did that wrong. That's not really helpful. Of course we all made mistakes, but let's talk about it as a team. Like, what could we own and what could we change to make sure we could set the next person up for more success? And that doesn't mean sometimes people actually just don't work. Maybe it's a culture clash, maybe it's a personality thing, but there's still some learning that can be done there. What was the part of the personality that didn't fit with our culture? So what should we be looking for in the future?
Mhm. Yeah, I totally agree. And I know the clients that I work with that it's an ongoing conversation, not to just look at the individual, but to look at the organization, which is, again, why I'm looking at operating discipline. I want to go back a couple of probably 2 minutes. You
Mhm.
talked about accountability because I think this comes into it. Um, I remember in the mid 90s when I had my first consulting business, I realized I don't want to help people hold people accountable. I want to help people be accountable. And I heard you say that. And I think there's a big difference there because holding, in one respect, you have to do that. But it could also feel like I'm going to wait until you start to fail and then I'm going to, deal with you versus I see things aren't working. How can I help you? And there's a big difference there.
Yeah. And I think leaving the room, leaving the space to make mistakes and to learn from them without someone having a fear. As I said, I think,
Yes.
driving leadership through fear tactics doesn't lead to success. It leads to people lying to you. It leads to people, not creating the best culture for other employees because people want to go to work, want to like their coworkers. And if you're creating that environment of, people being afraid to speak up or to say that they made a mistake, then I think it's a huge problem within an organization. And I think learning to laugh at yourself and, if you make a mistake, you make it once, maybe twice, you probably don't make it the third time. Right? If you have it, then it becomes a habit, not really a mistake or something that you're doing on and on. And then leave the room to ask questions and to come for counseling or to come, workshop it together. I think workshopping things are really, really an important part of leadership because if you just tell somebody everything what to do, then you're not giving them that room to make their own mistakes and that room for growth on their own.
And again, I don't mean to keep going back in the conversation, but you've said so many things that we could dive into. Coming back to when we hire someone and it doesn't quite work out the way that we wanted it to, you said we look at, where were the opportunities, right?
Mhm.
And so coming back to accountability and making the workplace safe. And again, that's, trendy word, make it safe. But basically, for me, it feels like we're saying we need feedback. We all are in this together. We need to be engaging on this. And whatever you have to say, as long as you say it with respect, right? We want to hear that because as a president, if you're just being told what you want to hear, how does that impact your ability to do your job?
Yeah, I think it makes it much harder and you're living disillusioned as on a day-to-day basis and that's not very helpful. I like to surround myself with people who are honest with me and who can tell me when they disagree with me and plenty of people do all the time. Even my head of HR will be like, "We respectfully disagree with this and this is why." And sometimes I'll be like, "You are totally right." And sometimes I'll be like, "Nope, I still want to go this way." And that's okay. And we have a relationship that allows that to happen. And I need that to happen because I know her perspective is so different than mine. Um, I had somebody tell me once, I always thought like, I'm a friendly person, I'm approachable. And she was just like, yes, you are, but your job is not like, and your title is not. And you have to realize that when you're speaking to people that you have to try even harder and that people, even as nice and as approachable as you think you can be, your
Yes.
title sometimes limits that. And I thought that was a really interesting perspective for someone to tell me. It really opened my eyes to something that I wasn't seeing before. And anytime I have those moments, like I really appreciate them because that was a lot of honesty to tell me. Like here I am, like, I'm so approachable. And they're like, here are the reasons why you're not. And I'm like,
Mhm.
okay,
Yeah.
I can learn from that.
Yeah. And Kelly, I appreciate that because I remember saying to someone too, it's like, I'm just Terry. And they're like, but you're the VP. I'm like, and but in their minds, the title overrode everything else.
Yes.
And in my mind, I'm thinking, we're just working together. And
Mhm.
so I think that again, the title is usually going to be in the way until you show people that it shouldn't be.
Right. Until you have the human aspect, until sometimes you trip and fall and you get up and laugh at yourself or whatever it is. And we used to have just like days at the property where we would go there and bring all of like plants and plant with the maintenance workers and everybody would just be planting together, getting dirty, just doing everything together. And it doesn't feel as much like this is the president, this is the vice president, whoever it is. It's just everyone working together towards a common goal. And I think those kind of exercises are really important because it's not, just one person who's like, oh, I don't carry anything. It's like, no, I carry everything the same as everyone else.
Mhm. Why don't you think that happens more? I mean, because I think people talk about it, but I don't know if they actually do it as part of their regular day-to-day business, which is what I call operating discipline.
I think there it's time. It's very old school. It's the way it's always been done. And sometimes like it's really just time management. Sometimes people feel like they don't have time, and if I only have X amount of time, this is what I'm going to invest it in. Or you don't really need me to do that.
Mhm.
But what people forget is that when you're the head of a company, you really set the tone for the culture, regardless what you're doing. If I'm the type of person who never takes vacation, then nobody else will take vacation, and everyone will. That'll set the tone that that's not okay. If I don't take lunch, there's plenty of times like I didn't even want to take lunch that I would take lunch because I was like, I don't want everyone around me to feel like they can't stop working.
Absolutely.
Just knowing that that people will follow your lead. And if you're trying to lead a company in a certain direction and you're doing something else, then it's not going to go there.
Mhm. No, I again, there's so many different things we could go into, and I really appreciate your honesty and your, your perspective on this. I think, again, I think it's just really challenging because you can know what to do, but then actually doing it. There's just this gap. And I think, we just try to close that gap in many different ways. And you said this early on. This is like getting back to the basics. You mentioned old school, and I know people don't like to say that, but it really is. It's just basic management. It's basic management. You're leading people. And so how do you lead people without connecting with them?
Yeah, I mean that's the problem is you have to connect with them. You have to find ways to do things together, to be social, to that things outside of work. And it can be hard, especially when you're running a company, to think that maybe those things aren't as important as all the other times, but it's the in between times that makes the harder times work better. When it's the same, like we say, even when it comes to rent collections, for example. I know this is a small thing, but you don't want to have to call somebody and introduce yourself for the first time when you're asking them to pay rent. You should have seen them in the building several times, seen them at events, say like, oh, I just saw that, your daughter graduated last week. Congratulations. I just wanted to give you a heads up that you're a couple of days behind on rent. That's such an easier conversation to have than, hi, I'm Kelley. We've never met before. You've been here a year. You're behind on rent. That's not the same thing. And it's the same with your employees. We're in a very high touch relationship driven business, and no amount of technology is really going to change that or take that away.
Hmm. Yeah, Kelly, just want to go here for a second because I'm hearing, everything that you're saying, and I'm thinking Rose Valley Management. Why do people want to work there? What makes Rose Valley Management unique?
I think it's kind of twofold because I say like sometimes it's not great to do things old school, but one thing that's great about old school, and the fact that it's a generational company, is the fact that it's been around for 40 years. And that helps. I know when I was recruited to this position, I felt like I wanted to know that it wasn't going to be gone in a year or gone in 2 years, and it had staying power. And the fact that the generational company, the CEO of the company, he started in the boiler rooms with his grandfather, and the fact that they have that kind of longevity to be able to weather through the different trends that have happened in real estate over the years and be able to pivot when necessary. That's something that was really important to me. But they also have institutional capabilities where they have outside investors. So it's not just, family run where there's no room to grow as somebody who's not family. They're open to new suggestions, able to pivot very quickly instead of being, a publicly traded company. Being private enables us to be able to change quickly if we need to. And they were very open to new ideas and changing. I'm the first president that they have of the company. And just by hiring me and having that change and showing that we wanted to have this change and we want to be able to grow our business in this direction, it gives you hope. And I think people like to see that. They like to see that things can be new and different and there's growth. And just in the 2 years I've been here, we've had tremendous amount of growth. In the first quarter of this year, we took on 4 new properties. So it's been great.
So, Rose Valley Management is a privately owned company?
Yes, it is.
Great. I worked with a company that was privately owned, and there was such a difference there because they didn't have the same quarterly pressures
Mhm.
as publicly traded companies. Doesn't mean that there weren't metrics to meet and things like that, but it's just they weren't playing to that. And so what difference do you think that makes in how you lead and how the organization is managed?
I mean, I think it makes a big difference because it shows you that, like I said, there's a lot of possibilities for change and that growth will be all of us together. And because it's a generational company, you can see how important the relationships matter, even within the family, but for people that have been here for years and years. One thing that we instilled this year with succession planning is to, if the person is growing from beneath them, for example, if say you have a community manager who's growing to be a regional manager, um, well, that regional manager obviously is losing one of their best employees because they were so great that they're getting promoted. And since they're getting promoted, like what happens to them? So we created a plan to help succession planning and to also benefit the people who trained people that were good enough to be promoted. So the person anyone below you who gets promoted, you would get a bonus for having them be promoted. And I think it kind of just, it's a way of giving back to say thank you instead of just saying like, thanks, now this person's promoted and you did a great service to them. You also did a great service to the company. And I think we need to recognize that as well.
And I'm also hearing, this is where I think there's an opportunity with a lot of companies. You're aligning your incentives with where your priorities need to be.
Mhm.
And so people see that direct connection because I think many times the incentives are here and the priority is here and we don't see the connection. But people will go where the incentives are. They will go where they're being recognized, where it's beneficial. And it's like, why don't you think companies line those things up?
I think sometimes they don't see it, the cause and effect, or even how it could negatively impact the person who loses those employees, right? Because they were great employees and they're saying, I'm willing to give up my number one or number two person. And in order to not create a culture, which can happen, and I've seen it happen where people don't put them up for promotion because they're somewhat selfish. They don't want to lose that person. And there's an aspect of human nature about that too, that you can't deny that it's going to make your job harder. You're going to have to find someone else. That being said, this year I had one regional who had like 3 people promoted from underneath them. And like that was such a sign of her doing such an amazing job that I felt like was so overwhelmed that I'm like, you can't not give back to that person. Um, I feel like I'm a leader who leads with a lot of empathy. And I always can kind of see the other side of the coin. But sometimes when you're so busy, usually it's like on a run or it's like at a time when I've like quiet, when you're totally separated from it, you're like, oh, we need to do something about that. We need to make sure how do we replicate this amongst other people too? How do we incentivize this to be a good thing to grow within our company? Because this region is doing excellent and it's not out of just happenstance. It's because that leader is doing excellent.
Yeah. I think, there's an intentionality that's there, right? Like you said, when it gets quiet, I can see these things. I think just being more intentional about what it takes for people to do the job that you're asking them to do. The other point that I think is important is um, hiring for the organization versus hiring for the position. Is there a difference?
At times, depends on the position that is head. Like we have all different geographical locations, and is there a differentiation between geographical locations or asset classes as far as who you're hiring? There are different personality types that I think better assimilate with each. That being said, there should be an overarching hiring for the organization that there is a cultural fit that happens across the board. And I think that's one of the hardest aspects when you get into a national run business is how do you have, from Houston to Middletown, Connecticut, how do you have that culture transcend to everybody and have that be the basis? And that's always really the challenge. And then especially if you're planning on growing and scaling, how do we then bring more on and have that assimilate into our culture and also not take away, not dilute it at all? I feel like those are the biggest challenges. And that's how do we do that? It changes daily, staying up with the times. If there are new incentives that motivate employees, like listening, hearing, and just, I guess, getting to know everybody and what motivates them, because what motivates people in Houston might not be what motivates people in Connecticut, but there should be an overarching,
Mhm.
you know, culture and theme there.
Which is what makes Rose Valley Management who they are,
Correct.
right? Going back to the, earlier question. So how many employees do you have?
We have about 200.
Okay. So if I have, I don't know, 1,000 employees, how do I do that?
So you do the same thing, but you scale, right? You have to then break it down into the basics and then rebuild it again. I think of it like Lego blocks in my mind. I'm a very visual person. And whether you have, one building or 3 buildings, 3 towers, it all starts with the core. And you just kind of dissect what you have and rebuild it in several sections.
Mm-hmm. And what?
But you have to have consistency. I think that's one of the most important parts is having consistency, having your SOPs that are there, having the guardrails, like if you're bowling and, you have a kid who's like constantly getting a gutter ball and then they put up those little guardrails in the bowling alley. They do it for a reason. Now, if you still get a gutter ball, at least you're closest to actually succeeding, right? Because we have to be able to put up those guardrails whenever you scale. That's something that's super important. If you don't have those guardrails, you cannot scale.
No, and it's interesting as you mentioned that about the bumpers. I'm thinking, yeah, the balls with the kids are going all over the place. But once you put the bumpers up, then they stay in line. And honestly, the kids get excited because they're winning. And I'm thinking,
right. And sometimes they still even go all the way down and go off. But like usually you're hitting at least 1 or 2. But that's like the parents' jobs. And that's the executives' jobs to be able to put up those guardrails and make sure that you can create an environment where things can still happen organically and succeed without having to, throw the ball for them, right? You still let them operate within that realm, but make sure those guardrails are in place for success, for success to happen.
So Kelley, we're going to switch just for a minute because I remember in our call about the podcast, I asked you something about how does AI play into the work that you do? And well, let's just go there. How does AI play into that?
Well, I think it can make everything a lot more efficient. I really enjoy using AI, I have to say. But I think it is to me what, Microsoft was to me in, 6th grade, or actually it's probably later, sadly, in college. It really gave me all the tools to be able to help do my job more efficiently, to help do it faster, but it doesn't replace what it is that I do. It's just everybody has to learn how to work, I guess, better. And it creates more time management. I think it really can spark creativity versus, diluting it, because you have a sounding board to use when sometimes you don't have that. So, I think it's been very, very helpful overall on a much, broader corporate level. As far as the properties are concerned, it helps, but again, it doesn't replace when you're having resident events. AI is not going to take that away. People still want to meet people. People still want downtime. Still want to have conversations with people. It doesn't fix your toilet. Doesn't, fix a leaky sink. It doesn't fix a roof leak. So we still need people, and we're still in a super high touch industry. Could that change? It absolutely can with the integration of robotics and other things, but there will still be, I think, a need for a human interaction.
No, thank you for sharing that because obviously, it's a big conversation, as it should be. I think, it's really important that in certain fields, it definitely will enhance, but it won't replace. And, employees, rightfully so, it's like, I don't know how this is going to affect my job. So have you been hearing that, at Rose Valley Management? Have people been asking that question, or, have they shown concern about AI?
Yeah, I think there are some people that are a little adverse to using it because they're afraid of what it could mean. If I'm, a very good editor and all of a sudden this program can edit everything you just said in 2 seconds rather than taking 3 hours to edit it, then what do I have? It's like, well, you have a program that can help it, expand and edit, and you can do more writing. And, I think it's really, as you said, it's not taking away from it's going to help you do more. Marketing is a huge field that's big in AI right now because there's so many things you can make in AI and graphics, and but you can just make things better quicker, and then you can do more. So it's not
Yeah.
taking it away. You still need somebody to control it. You still need somebody to drive the ship, right? Um, there's no replacing as of right now. We're absolutely not there. And then you need to have that kind of interaction of thinking outside the box. Like your outcome is only as good as the prompts you put in. So get better at prompting versus get better at writing, and it changes a little bit.
hmm it's interesting. I had a guest on the show, and he said something that has just stayed with me because I said, "Oh my gosh, it's so powerful." So with AI, he said we had to work with our employees to help them understand the value that they bring beyond the task that they're doing. And I thought, absolutely, because if my task can be taken over by AI, then what am I going to do? Versus what you just said, which is you'll be able to do it faster, or you'll be able to do more. I mean,
You can
help.
do 5 tasks instead
Yes,
of one task. And instead of you doing the actual task, you're now overseeing the task.
right. And I think it's really important for us to have that perspective that we need to think through. When I say we, it's the leadership needs to think through what does this mean and help that conversation in the organization because it's all around us. Conversations are happening. Even if we're not having it, it's happening. And so why don't we join it and why don't we start to guide it and make it work for us instead of running behind it? And it's like,
100%.
we have to rally everything together.
100%. And it was the same with different generations when it came to, as you said, like the internet or using Google. Like, why do I don't use that for research? And it's like, well, everybody's using it. So you should learn how to use it and how to perfect it and how to get better at it. And that doesn't dilute what your skills are.
Mm-mm. So I just wanted to get that piece in there because again, everybody is talking about that. I mean, I think that's an accurate statement. Everybody's talking about it, but what it actually looks like in an organization is where the real opportunity is, and how companies are helping, how they're navigating it, and how they're helping the conversation. And that one comment stopped me in my tracks, and I said,
Yeah.
"That is a very valuable comment. That we have to help people understand." The value that they bring. And I think, listening to you and how you're working within, your company it is really amazing from the standpoint of you already have a strong foundation with that,
And I
right?
think in general, like hiring for experience or certain skills is something that has changed. Like now we're hiring more for adaptability. I
Mm,
think that's one of the like a very expensive mistake that a leader can make.
mhm.
Curiosity and accountability are much harder to
Mm.
have than just a set math skill.
So let me ask you that, and then we're going to wrap it up. So I think, we're hiring for adaptability, right?
Mhm,
Um, Curiosity and things like that. So here's one of the experiences that I've seen. Companies will say, "We want these things," and
mhm.
then they hire people who have that. But when they come into the system and do what we want them to do, the system doesn't receive that well because the system is not set up to embrace that. What are your thoughts about that?
I think the system is changing. I think the system is because um, just with technology alone, spoke at the AI summit this past winter,
Mhm.
and I never even knew it existed. I was like, "Oh, this must be the first year." It's like, nope, this is year 10, and this is the first year any real estate prop tech being property management technology was invited, and it was just me and one other person that were invited to speak at it. And I'm like, wow, we are so far behind. So I think we're there as far as adaptability. Like we need people to be adaptable because things are changing in property management so rapidly. Also because we're catching up to the rest of the technology a little bit. And I think like transformation isn't one big initiative. It's 100 of small decisions that are repeated consistently.
Mhm. Now, I have enjoyed this conversation so much, and you and I know we could go in a lot of different places with this. So, as we close this out, Kelly, what wise words of wisdom would you like to share with the CEO and senior leader community?
I think leadership isn't measured by how many problems you solve personally. I think it's measured by how many problems your organization learns to solve
Mhm.
without you. Like someone once told me, if you're doing everything yourself, you're doing it wrong. So I think really entrusting people to do the right thing and giving them the tools to do that is probably one of the most important leadership lessons that I've learned.
Mhm. No, that's absolutely excellent, and I appreciate this conversation. I appreciate your insights, and I think you've demonstrated that performance is never accidental. It's built into how the organization actually operates. So we're going to close this out. Thank you, Kelley, for being a guest,
Thank
and
you so much
we
for
will
having me.
we will see you next time on Operating Discipline.